Hey guys, hope you all are doing really well. This is our third lecture within this unit, Unit 5. And within this unit, again, we are focusing on fire and fire management and forests and forest management. And this is a very current lecture. I actually, changed it up from last year because of these 2019 forest fires that raged through the Amazon. So I'm really excited to share this information with you. And again, we are going to focus on these Amazonian fires and as well as the ecological services that forests provide us with. So, like I mentioned, we're going to focus on how these forest fires started in the first place, which has to do with the altering land use. And we're going to focus on the Brazilian politics that has led to this Amazonian destruction. And again, this is ongoing, right? Next, we'll focus on 6 ecological services that these forests provide. So there's more than 6, but we're going to focus on 6. And then finally, we're going to finish up looking at how humans have reduced the ecological services that forests provide. So when we think about the Amazon, you should think of the biome that makes up the Amazon rainforest. And yes, you should have thought tropical rainforests. These biomes we learned about already, and this picture is from that first lecture within that unit that dealt with biomes and biodiversity. If you remember, give yourself a pat on the back if you remember what type of tree this was. This was a ceiba tree. Ceiba, again, in the indigenous language, means tree of life. And you could see all the different epiphytes growing from the branches. You see the strangler figs that will eventually reach down and sequester its own nutrients. So really, really cool. You can, in this one picture, you get to see the extreme biodiversity in these tropical ecosystems. This figure should be very familiar. You should be very familiar with this figure. And the dark green depicts these tropical biomes. And you could see how large the Amazon forest is, the Amazon rainforest. It is a sizable chunk, larger than half of the United States of America. So extremely dense. And they have this region on the planet allows so many different organisms to exist. Not to mention all the oxygen this region releases each day. This figure, again, more review. We have tropical rainforests that have the highest precipitation of all the other biomes and relatively warm temperatures because most of these tropical rainforests are near the equator. So they get a lot of incoming sunlight throughout the year. Doesn't matter how the earth is tilting, the equator is always going to have the highest amounts of incoming solar radiation. And remember why the tropical rainforests the temperature actually decreases because of all of the water that these ecosystems receive. Remember, water through evaporative cooling cools down these ecosystems. So in places that don't have water, like in deserts, in the same exact latitude, they're going to be hotter because there's much less water, and water evaporates and pulls heat away from those biomes. When we look at this, the different biomes on our planet compared to the forest area and the nations that have the most forest area, you see that Brazil is the second largest place. The second is the country with the second most forest area. The Russian Federation, it has almost double the area of forests. However, these forests are fundamentally much different. Remember, this northern latitude, this red region is taiga, or boreal forests. So these boreal forests, also known as taiga, are not very biodiverse. They're filled with conifer trees. It's really cold, so you don't have a lot of productivity. So yes, area is a big thing, but depending on where those forests are, you're going to have totally different ecological interactions. You're going to learn later on that the Amazon is super productive, and it actually releases 20% of the Earth's oxygen. So really, really crazy. So size does matter here, but also it is tied to the type of biome and the global position of that biome. So Brazil is integral, and we're going to learn is integral for creating laws to protect the Amazon because of how important this forest is, not only to South America but the entire planet. So in 2018, this Brazilian, his name is Bolsonaro, he was elected the president of Brazil, and he has many similar motives to President Trump. Now, President Trump, he is about to be removed from the White House, thankfully, for many reasons. But here we have this Brazilian who shares many of his ideas and has looked up to Trump, and thus has been given the name the Trump of the tropics. So quite similar to Trump, he is a religious fundamentalist. He is a vocal opponent against same-sex marriage. Environmental regulations have gone out the window since he's been elected. He's against abortion. He's against affirmative action. He is against immigration, calling certain groups the scum of the earth. So really striking similarities between him and Trump. Can't stand this guy. And he is a main catalyst for the Amazonian fires. And we're going to get into why. And it's just so important. I can't tell you guys enough. It's so important for you guys to stay active when it comes to voting and such. Because other countries, not just America, other countries look up to us. And what we decide, our president, and what our political views radiates to other countries. So, Trump winning the presidency last term, it had far-reaching effects than just our own country. This guy was elected, like I said, in 2018. He was elected, and most of his voters were upper middle class white males. So again, these striking similarities, these people that are empowered by these social injustices, and we're going to see how this has led to the destruction of the Amazon rainforest. So throughout the world, there are certain political parties that favor profit over preservation. Now, we see this today, right? This is a very prevalent political idea. And for example, we have, Donald Trump relaxing environmental laws, so that Americans, the American GDP can increase. If we increase mining and, deforest land and search for oil, our dollar is going to be worth more. So many political parties throughout the world, they favor profit over preservation. In the Amazon and with Brazil, Bolsonaro is clearly on this side as well. And since he has taken control, we see more and more deforestation of the Amazon. Now, the reason for deforestation is to make way for cattle farms, soy plantation, and the mining industry. So Brazil is actually the second largest producer of beef. When farmers come in and they buy land, their cattle cannot live in the Amazon rainforest, right? So they have to clear that land to make room for actual space for cattle. And 10.3 million metric tons of beef is created each year in Brazil. The only country that produces more cattle is the United States of America. And we see the destruction of these huge cattle complexes from their waste running off into waterways to the absolute dismantling of natural ecosystems to actually just create space for these animals. This picture depicts two different farming complexes. So this is one person's property. This is another person's property. This is dense Amazonian rainforests. And you have hundreds and hundreds of species over here. And over here, there's only one. And that's soybeans, right? And soybeans, these are monocultures, right? And it just, what a difference, right? There's honestly thousands of species that we're looking at. Look at all these different colors of green here, depicting all these different tree species. And that's only the trees. What's going on the forest floor here, right? Thousands of species, one species, right? And here's some pictures showing the destruction of the Amazon for mining purposes. The abundance and demand for gold throughout the world, whether it's jewelry, whether it is electronics, this demand is surging. Gold is always going to be in demand, and it causes this major destruction of the Amazon. This will never truly, it'll take thousands and thousands of years for this to return back to, an old growth section of the Amazon. And you could see even over here, the actual deeper mining practices, you totally change the way of the land. This will never return to its original state. Bolsonaro has also threatened to do away with the legislative protection afforded to environmental reserves and indigenous communities. So there are several tribes that live within Brazil that have just lived in the Amazon for millennia. And they don't offer him any, profits. So, he doesn't want to protect them. Since he's taken charge, the destruction of the Amazon forest has increased by 88%. So compared to the previous year in that month of June, 88% more destruction. The Bolsonaro administration has decreased the government efforts which combat illegal logging, ranching, and mining in the Amazon. So there are these laws there, but they're not really being upheld, right? And look at how beautiful the Amazon is, right? And here's Bolsonaro with Putin. So he also just completely rejects the scientific consensus on climate change. He has stated that global warming is nothing more than greenhouse fables. So, and President Trump also, has said several things that combat the scientific consensus. And this is, this was our president, and we need somebody that understands at least what's going on. And here we have a president that is literally in this country that contains some of the most biodiverse places on the planet, and he doesn't understand, or he probably does understand it, right? But he's just neglecting to accept it, so he can carry out his money-seeking agenda, right? So with relaxed laws and prosecution, slash and burn, which we learned about already, which is a technique to remove forests and change the state of a forest, slash and burn techniques were used extensively once he took office. So in order to create room for cattle, in order to remove forests so you could plant soybeans, and in order to remove vegetation so you could start mining, people use this technique that we already learned about, slash and burn. So these techniques, slash and burn techniques, also relating to the global droughts that we have been seeing because of the temperature changes on our planet, have catalyzed these ginormous forest fires throughout the Amazon. So slash and burn, the Amazonians, right? The native people of Brazil, they do slash and burn to grow their crops and for other ecological reasons, right? But in modern day times, it's much drier than it has been historically. So these slash and burn techniques, the fires that they, the controlled, small fires that are slash and burn, have gotten out of hand, right? And because it's much drier, these fires rage. So after these fires ensued throughout Brazil, eventually you get these massive forest fires, and 906,000 hectares of Amazon forest was lost in 2019. That's 7,200 square miles. So this is a massive area, and all these red marks are showing the areas completely removed by forest fires. So this has global implication. This is carbon monoxide caused by fires in the Amazon region from August 8th to August 22nd in 2019. Look at how much carbon monoxide is released. And you can see this is a global interaction, right? Instead of the Amazon sequestering carbon, it's releasing carbon now, right? That's what happens with combustion. This chemical reaction releases carbon, right? And here's another depiction using satellite imagery showing the extensive area of fires throughout the Amazon. And realize that this is Brazil here. The Amazon extends through several countries in South America. And, I'm focusing on Brazilian politics, but there, are shady Bolivian politics, for example. But the area that was burned is sadly enormous. The outcomes, however, the increased pressure from the international community actually made Bolsonaro more willing to be proactive into mitigating these massive fires. And on August 23rd in 2019, he said that the government would take a zero tolerance approach to environmental crime. So illegal, logging, illegal slash and burn. So he did upregulate his response to these forest fires. On August 29th, 2019, Brazil banned clearing by setting land on fire. And this slide, the most important thing here is public opinion. If people around the world didn't feel strongly about this would ensue, right? Not even Brazilians, like the European Union, Americans, Canadians, people from around the world increased their knowledge about what was going on in the Amazon, right? And this change in public opinion radiated all the way up to these executive orders to reduce these cataclysmic events, right? So the importance of being knowledgeable, the importance of staying informed and sharing ideas and facts about what's happening with the world on an environmental scale is imperative, right? Us, the everyday person, as a citizen scientist, has a very important role on these environmental issues, right? So even though you're home, even though you're probably in Buffalo, New York, you staying up to date with what's going on in the planet, you voting for somebody who understands the environment and interactions associated with the environment have a huge role. And I just wanted to end with this picture of Rio de Janeiro. Absolutely love this picture. I've never gone to Brazil. It is on my bucket list for sure. But all in all, these forests that have burned, and with the climate changing, might actually just totally change state, right? So you have these rainforests here. Let's just say this is the Amazon. The removal of those rainforests through fire, because of all these droughts and because of land management practices, can actually change the biome into a different biome. And that different biome will have a different fire frequency, and you can totally just change the state of those biomes. The second part of this lecture, we're going to focus on the ecological services that forests provide. Number one, they store and sequester carbon. Number two, they release oxygen. Number three, they enhance biodiversity. Number four, we use them for recreation. Number five, there are medicinal properties. And number six, they filter water. So first is first, they sequester and store carbon. We know this, right? They utilize CO2. They uptake CO2 through their leaves, and they photosynthesize and change that carbon into carbohydrates that can get worked into their woody tissues and be stored for decades, right? So they sequester, which is sucking up carbon, and then store it in a physical form, a solid form, not a gaseous form. So the less carbon in our atmosphere, the cooler the planet, or the less the planet will warm up. Now, depending on which biome you're looking at, there is a maximum amount of carbon storage volume. So this forest is a mixed deciduous forest. There are conifers and deciduous broadleaf trees here. And through time, from, let's just say there's a intense forest fire, and then you get this ecological succession. So you get, seeds that germinate and grow and grow and grow, and then you get these mature old growth forests. These old forests, they level off, which means they don't, the amount of carbon that they store doesn't increase indefinitely. And this is for many reasons. But one of them, one important characteristic is competition, right? So in these old growth forests, look at how dense they are. There's only so much light that there's only so much light that the sun emits that can be uptaken by these plants. There's only so much resources in the soil. There's only so much water that the biome receives. So because of these limited resources, there's a limited amount of growth, which shows up in this amount of carbon that can be stored. So we see this figure, and it's increasing at a decreasing rate as the forest ages. Forests release oxygen. I love this. This is obviously not a real photo, it's Photoshop, but you can see its lungs, right? And the bronchus on either lobe of the lung is this really cool stream. And forests, they clearly release oxygen. Photosynthesis, the byproduct of photosynthesis is oxygen. And I like this picture too. You see these spaces between the trees. Next time the leaves come out, go on a hike, look straight up, and try to check out this really cool term called canopy shyness. So you will see that this tree has this ring around it. And you do see these lines in between tree individuals. There are many hypotheses of why there are these lines. The easiest one to realize is that the moving branches actually knock the outermost branches off of their neighbor, leading to this gap. Another hypothesis that is a little more dynamic is that the trees are actually sensing their neighbor, and they just simply stop growing to a certain point because competition is a negative interaction, right? Instead of, being blocked out by your neighbor and then having your neighbor block you back out, you're creating all this leaf material that's not even getting a lot of photosynthesis, and you're just wasting energy by competing. So all in all, it's probably both of these combined. The plants are probably sensing their neighbor, but also the outermost branches are too probably getting knocked off. I want us to note from this figure that the Amazon produces 20% of the world's oxygen, right? And here are some other Amazon jungle facts. There are like an insane amount of different organisms. The Amazon River is the longest river in the world, which is over 4,000 miles in length. Staggering. There's almost 2,000 species of known birds. It's the largest rainforest on the planet, 2.3 million miles squared, and it runs through 6 countries. And another ecological service is that these forests enhance biodiversity. Here are several biodiversity hotspots throughout the world. Many of these are going to be forest systems. Some are out in the ocean and coral reefs and such, but many are these really amazing forest systems. Now, the number of species as a function of area is similar to the amount of carbon stored as a function of forest maturation. So as you increase an area, let's just say you preserve this area of land, and over time, if the area of a forest moved from, if it was originally this big and you made the forest this big, the amount of species would increase, right? So another interesting thing happens is that you get this increasing at a decreasing rate. So yes, you increase the forest area, you will get more and more species come into that area. However, that levels off as well. So you get this diminishing return, which is just a limitation of the organisms that can live there. You reach to a certain point, 50 kilometers squared, that's a huge area. And you're going to have most of the species eventually migrate to that area that can actually live there. You get this really sharp increase in number of species when you move from, 1 kilometer squared to 10 kilometers squared, because, that's a stark difference. Not many organisms can live and carry out their entire life cycle in a really small area. So it makes sense why from 0 to 10, you get this sharp increase in the number of species. Now, this graph on the right is actually showing the same thing. Because it is this logarithmic scale, you get this increasing at a decreasing rate. Recreation. It might not seem really relevant, but it totally is. These places, these natural places, these forest biomes, they increase the GDP of the area, and much of this money, if it's state or national parks, a lot of your admission to that park goes to researchers, it goes to preservation, and not to mention the benefits that we receive from being out in nature. So there was this one study, it was a long-term mental health study of over 10,000 people over the age of 18. And they showed that living near a green space was associated with less mental distress. There are so many studies that associate, chronic stress with just like being in a office environment. And getting out in nature can greatly reduce that. So other studies suggest that being in nature improves the immune system. It counteracts the physiological stress and restores the brain's ability to focus. And it adds meaning to life. So there are so many benefits associated with getting out in nature. I recommend you guys always take a walk. If you have a dog, it's easy to go take a walk. So definitely go outside, take a deep breath in. If you're inside all day, being outside is so good for you and your mental state. So another ecological service forest provides is this medicinal value. And there are several things we could find in these forest biomes that we can utilize in the medical field. I'm going to focus just on one. And this is my one of my favorite American mycologists, Paul Stamets. One species that he has a lot of interest in with his research is this fungus known as the mighty agarikon, which is Larcophomys officinalis. And a Greek physician, Dioscorides, named the agarikon mushroom Elixirem ad longum vitam, which translates to the elixir of long life. So you only really find these mushrooms in the Pacific Northwest. So Washington, Oregon, sometimes Northern California. And you only actually find them in old growth forests. So they grow on many different conifers. They really like, Douglas fir and some ponderosa pines. On really, really old mature trees like this. We don't even see trees like this on the East Coast. This fungus can be 400 years old, which makes a lot of sense why there are a lot of medicinal properties in this fungus. So as you know, fungi and animals, they are closely related. They share a common ancestor, a more close common ancestor than compared to a lot of other organisms. So plants, we're not that related to plants, but we are very closely related to different fungi, the kingdom of fungi. So we encounter some similar pathogens because we're closely related. It makes sense why there's a lot of medicinal properties here, because these mushrooms they can grow to be 400 years old. So you have all these different bacteria that they'll encounter, all these different viruses that they will encounter. And because they live these long lives, they have to combat these pathogens, right? A fungus that lives one day, it won't have any microbial properties that, reduces bacterial infection. If you're living in one day, you're going to, allocate all your energy into the amount of spores you produce, because you're ephemeral. You're dying after that one day. Long-lived species, they have better immune systems. And so we can look and, chemically break down this organism and see what kind of compounds it creates to deter certain pathogens, right? So, unfortunately, 150 years of intense logging in the Pacific Northwest has resulted in us having only 5% of the old growth forests. And like I mentioned, the agarikon, it only grows in these old growth forest settings. So we've greatly reduced the area which this fungus thrives. And I follow a lot of different mushroom forums on Facebook. And when somebody from the Pacific Northwest finds an agarikon mushroom, it gets like 1,000 upvotes. People just go crazy because it's rare, because you have to really, really know what you're looking for. They can grow like really, really tall on these old growth trees. And there is just an intense amount of research that has to do with virology. So there are antiviral compounds that these mushrooms synthesize. Now, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, they monitor freshwater streams. They know that, streams are really important. So they don't want all this runoff to make its way into these freshwater ecosystems? Well, what farmers do, it's a really simple thing, is to just have a riparian buffer. So a tiny little forest section that filters that runoff that would otherwise go right into the stream, right? So forests clearly filter water. So not just plant roots, but the fungus that surrounds plant roots, the bacteria living within the soil, all these organisms together, they filter out water reaching these freshwater systems. When you have flooding events and you don't have a riparian ecosystem bordering fresh water, you get this insane amount of nitrogen and phosphorus that works its way into the water. You get these algal blooms, and we know that these giant algal blooms eventually sink to the bottom, and anaerobic bacteria remove all the oxygen, creating anoxic conditions. You see these giant fish kills. So the last part of this lecture, we're focusing on how humans reduce these ecosystem services. Well, we clearly know that we've altered fire regimes. We put out most fires, which has increased fuel loads, and we now are causing many fires just through having these large fuel loads and, cigarette butts, for example, as well as, today's lecture, we focused all on these, political ideas of profit over, preservation. So mining, cattle, and soybean, for example, in the Amazon. Deforestation through logging also reduces these services these forests provide. Now, there are two types of logging that we will learn about: clear cutting as well as selective harvesting, and then over harvesting forest species for profit. So we will get into all of these. First off, we'll get into clear cutting, removal of entire sections of forest. So this is like a really sad thing. You can see it from space. You can see it using satellite images. These cookie cutter, geometrical shapes that the forest has been removed through cutting all and every organism in a certain area. So very interestingly enough, as you remove the debris from an area through clear cutting, you also carry all the nutrients that have been locked up in these organisms away from the environment from which they grew. So this totally changes the ecosystem. You strip the ecosystem from nutrients, you strip it, it has less structure, so you're going to have more mudslides and landslides because there's no roots holding the land together. The incoming light is going to be extremely intense, which is going to increase the temperature of that land. And then the soil communities, the microbes are totally going to change. And then water is going to pool because there's no trees sucking up that water. So you're totally changing these ecosystems through clear cutting. And here we have some depictions of clear cutting. I like this photo because it actually does look like a tree, right? The roads, the major logging roads actually look like the trunk and the branches of a tree, which is kind of, ironic a little bit. This actually is a river, which is really crazy. So many clear cutting logging practices throughout time, they would just dump all of the processed logs in these streams or rivers, and then the water would carry those logs to a sawmill right on the river. This tree is just massive. I just wanted to show you how big this tree was. Now, selecting harvesting, like it suggests, is when not all individuals are felled in a single area like clear cutting. Sometimes just one species is removed. Sometimes it's just like the largest or oldest individuals that are removed. So, loggers will go and hike through a forest and they will select, the large ones. They'll mark it with, paint. For example, in this biome, you had the largest individuals removed. And you could see here in just a few years through logging practices, environmentally it seems not as detrimental, and it isn't, but it still is ecologically detrimental. Look at this really large area that has been removed through selective harvesting. And there are several machines that are brought for logging. I'll put this link. This is actually a really cool machine. But think about all the weight that is underneath this machine, right? That is changing the forest in really interesting ways. So even still, at selective forested sites, much ecological functioning is reduced. There's going to be a high rate of forest fire as there's a lot of debris left behind. There's going to be unwanted tree fall. As trees are felled, sometimes they knock down other trees. Sometimes they uproot other trees. The microclimate's going to be totally changed. And soil compaction, like I was just mentioning, can totally actually kill certain species. An author from a book that I'm reading, she discusses and actually looks and studies forest ecosystems. She actually had land. She bought this house and she cleared some of the land, but wanted to preserve these giant sycamore trees on her property. However, there were these tractors that drove around these trees, and that soil compaction, it changed the amount of, the amount of oxygen and the amount of water that could reach those roots, and all of these giant sycamore trees died. So soil compaction as well as erosion are still very prevalent when it comes to selective harvesting. So back looking at the Amazon forest, 5,800 square miles, which is the size of Connecticut, are burned or clear cut each year to make room for cattle ranching, farming, and other development each year. When selective logging is factored in, that figure increases twofold. So selective harvesting, it doesn't look, on the surface, it doesn't look as destructive, but the area of selective harvesting is still extremely great. And you can see that different organisms, they are altered differently as logging intensity increases. So birds and generalist birds, they actually increase with logging intensity because there is an opportunity. They're generalists and they're good at adaptation and they can fly, so they aren't limited by dispersal. But every other organism here is greatly reduced through logging practices. So to recap today's lecture, we know that natural fire regimes have drastically been altered. There are some political parties that favor profit over anything else. Citizens from around the world can educate themselves on global occurrences of environmental destruction and catalyze a change in public opinion. That's you. Forests provide a great number of ecological services, and even the seemingly low impact foresting techniques can can radically alter the ecosystem functioning. So that concludes today's lecture. Now, I shot this on November 25th, 2020, the day before Thanksgiving. So I just want to wish you guys all a happy Thanksgiving, even if you watch this later. I hope you guys are thankful. I'm thankful for you guys. Keep on being the change you want to see on this planet. Give your parents a hug, and enjoy your little break from school. And I will catch up with you later. Happy Thanksgiving again, and I will I'll catch up with you next week. All right, see you guys.